You've been told to eat less and move more. For most of your life, it worked. The math added up. You'd drop a sleeve size before a wedding, hold it through summer, ease back into normal by fall. Annoying, but predictable. Then, somewhere around 42, it stopped. Same logic, same effort, same plate, different body. The pants don't button, the scale doesn't move. You eat less, you train more, and the only thing that drops is your patience. Here's the part your doctor doesn't have 15 minutes to explain. Your metabolism didn't slow down with age. That phrase, metabolism slows with age, is one of the most repeated, least accurate sentences in modern health writing. Peer-reviewed research published in Science in 2021, led by researchers at Duke University and the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, tracked daily energy expenditure across more than 6,400 people, ranging from 8-day-old infants to 95-year-old adults. The finding was clean. Between roughly age 20 and age 60, your baseline burn rate barely budges. It's nearly flat. The real decline doesn't start until your 60s, so if the engine isn't slowing, why is the weight sticking? The honest answer isn't a slogan. The honest answer is a system. 4 mechanisms, compounding quietly, all switching on inside the same decade of life. Once you see how they fit together, the conversation about fat loss after 40 changes shape, permanently. I'm going to walk you through that system. By the end, you'll understand why every diet that worked in your 20s stopped delivering in your 40s. You'll know what changed, and you'll know what the research actually suggests holds, long-term, for people in your stage of life. A few things to stick around for. There's a study, one of the most cited in modern obesity science, that followed 13 adults for 6 years after they lost staggering amounts of weight on a reality television show. When researchers at the National Institutes of Health checked back in at year 6, what they measured surprised even the scientists who designed the project. We're getting to it. It explains more than every diet headline in your news feed put together. Before we're done, I'm also going to show you a single number on a standard blood panel, a number most physicians don't order, a number that, in published research, starts rising 5 to 10 years before the test most doctors do order picks up a thing. If you've ever been told your labs are normal while your body very clearly disagrees, this number is probably the reason. And here's the frame to carry through the rest of this video. Your body isn't trying to be lean. Your body is trying to defend a weight. After 40, the weight it's defending isn't always the one you'd choose. That isn't a personality flaw. That isn't weakness. That's a regulated biological system doing precisely what evolution built it to do: keep you alive through scarcity. The body that protected your great-grandmother through a hard winter is the same body protecting you from a Tuesday salad. This isn't your fault. And it isn't fixed by trying harder at the thing that already stopped working. But before we get to the experiment, the hormones, and the blood test almost no one orders, let's start somewhere closer, inside the body that isn't cooperating. Because if you felt this, if you're feeling it right now, you already know something most diet advice on the internet hasn't caught up to. So let's talk about what you actually feel. Not what an article on a clinic's website says you should feel, what shows up in your day. The first 2 weeks of any diet still work. That part hasn't changed. You cut back, you clean up the kitchen, the number on the scale drops 3 or 4 pounds in a week, and there's a glimmer of the body that used to respond. You think, okay, here we go. This time. Then week 3 arrives, and the floor falls out. The scale stops moving. Not slows, stops. You're doing more, not less. The cardio session that used to feel light now feels punitive. By Wednesday afternoon, you're cold in a warm office. By Thursday, you can't remember the agenda of the last meeting you sat through. By Friday, you're standing in front of an open pantry at 9 in the evening, holding the door, having a conversation with yourself you're going to lose. And it isn't just hunger. It's a quality of hunger you didn't used to feel. It doesn't pass when you drink water. It doesn't pass when you go to bed. It rebuilds itself on a faster clock. You eat dinner, and 90 minutes later you'd swear you skipped a meal. Friends in their 20s on the same plan are not having this conversation. Their hunger leaves. Yours doesn't. Then there's the part nobody warns you about. You break the routine. Just one meal, the office birthday cake, a Saturday dinner out, and by Monday morning the scale is up 4 pounds. 4 pounds in 2 days from eating an amount of food a younger version of you would have called a normal evening. The mind goes immediately to the same conclusion every time. I have no discipline. That conclusion is wrong, and it's wrong in a way the research can actually measure. We'll get to the measuring. Over time, the pattern compounds. Each round of dieting feels heavier. Each return to normal eating costs you more pounds than the last one. The window of food that works gets smaller. The window of food that puts weight on gets wider. You walk past a photo of yourself from 10 years ago on the way to the kitchen, and the person in the frame might as well be a stranger, operating under different physics. And every doctor's visit ends the same way. Labs are fine, blood pressure is fine, just eat a little less, move a little more. You leave the office with a printout and the strong feeling that the appointment didn't happen. Here's what I want you to hear clearly. The reason none of this is working is not that you are weak. It is not that you are lazy. It is not that you are eating in your sleep. The reason none of this is working is that the body you have at 45 is not the body you had at 25. And the rules that governed the younger one were retired without anyone sending you the memo. This is a regulated system. It has names, mechanisms, hormones, measurable shifts in blood work. Researchers have been documenting it for decades. Most of that work never reaches the patient room because translating it into a 5-minute appointment is, frankly, impossible. So we're going to do the translation. We'll start with the single most famous demonstration of what your body is actually doing when you cut food after 40. It involves 13 adults, a reality television show, an NIH researcher with a metabolic chamber, and a number that, when it came back, made obesity scientists rethink the entire model. In 2009, 16 severely overweight adults walked into a televised competition called The Biggest Loser. Over 30 weeks, under extreme caloric restriction and several hours a day of supervised exercise, they lost, on average, about 128 pounds each. That's roughly 40% of their starting body weight, gone in under 8 months. By any measure, the protocol worked. Loudly. On camera. What you didn't see on television is what happened next. A team at the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, part of the NIH, led by a researcher named Kevin Hall, brought 14 of these contestants into a laboratory, slid them inside a metabolic chamber, and measured exactly how many calories each body was burning at rest. Not estimated, measured. The chamber is a small, sealed room that captures every molecule of oxygen consumed and carbon dioxide exhaled. It's the closest thing science has to a perfect calorimeter for a living person. They measured at the start of the competition. They measured at the end. And then, 6 years later, they brought every available contestant back and measured a third time. The third measurement is the one the field has not stopped talking about. By year 6, most of the contestants had regained the majority of the weight they had lost. That's the part most people who heard about this study online took home and stopped at. The real finding came one layer deeper. When Hall's team compared the resting metabolic rate of each contestant against what their current body size should be burning, using equations validated on tens of thousands of people, there was a gap. A persistent, measurable gap. On average, each contestant was burning about 500 calories per day fewer at rest than a person of their same age and body composition would be expected to burn. 500 calories every day. 6 years after the diet ended. That's not a slowdown that fades. That's a slowdown that took up residence. The phenomenon has a name in the literature: adaptive thermogenesis. In plain language, when you cut food hard, your body recalibrates downward, lowers the thermostat on background expenditure, and locks the new lower setting in. It is not a bug. It is a deeply conserved survival feature. The same machinery that protected our species during droughts and lean winters is the machinery now defending you against a meal plan PDF. The study, published in the journal Obesity in 2016, did one more thing worth knowing. It correlated the size of each contestant's metabolic gap with how much weight they regained. The deeper the slowdown, the heavier the rebound. The body wasn't just burning less, it was actively pulling the weight back. Now, I can hear the objection forming. These were extreme cases. 30-week competition, trainers shouting on camera. Caloric restriction most adults could not approach, much less sustain. Surely a moderate diet, the kind you and I would actually do, doesn't produce this kind of response. That is the obvious question, and it has been answered. Carefully. In a laboratory, on non-celebrity adults losing modest amounts of weight under controlled conditions. The lab is at Rockefeller University in New York, and the researchers there have been quietly publishing on this question for more than 30 years. That's where we go next. Rockefeller University, Upper East Side of Manhattan. For the better part of 3 decades, 2 researchers there, Rudolf Leibel and his colleague Michael Rosenbaum, have been asking a single, stubborn question. Does the body defend a specific weight the way it defends a specific body temperature? Or is weight loss simply arithmetic? To answer that, they did something almost no other lab could pull off. They admitted ordinary adults, not contestants, not extreme cases, into a hospital research unit, fed them a precisely measured liquid diet, dropped their body weight by exactly 10%, and then, while keeping them at that new lower weight, measured everything. Total daily energy use, hormone levels, the mechanical work cost of muscle, heart rate response, body temperature. The result has been replicated, in their own lab and elsewhere, for more than 20 years. A 10% weight loss, modest by any standard, the kind your doctor would call a good start, produces a drop in total daily energy expenditure of roughly 20 to 25% beyond what your new body size predicts. For an average adult, that's a real-world gap of several hundred calories every day. Not at the scale of a contestant dropping 100 pounds, at the scale of a regular person dropping 15. And it isn't one mechanism. It's a coordinated downshift. Thyroid hormone, specifically the active form called T3, drops measurably. The thyroid is the body's gas pedal on cellular activity. Lower T3 means every cell quietly burns slower in the background. The fall during weight loss is not a thyroid disease. It's the thyroid doing what evolution programmed it to do when food runs short. The sympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for alertness, body heat, and daily energy turnover, dials itself down. You feel this as cold hands, cold feet, low afternoon energy, and the strange flatness that descends on long-running diets. Then there's the most counterintuitive finding in the Rockefeller work. After weight loss, the same muscle, moving the same load, burns fewer calories. Your skeletal muscle becomes more efficient, not in the way you'd want, but in a survival mode way. The same walk to the mailbox costs less. So the activity tracker that promised to burn off the cookie is now lying to you by something the literature pegs in the range of 15 to 20% of the expected cost. There's one more piece. A single hormone that falls sharply during weight loss and stays suppressed for months, perhaps far longer. In Rosenbaum's lab, when they restored that hormone to pre-diet levels by injection, most of the slowdown we just walked through reversed. The thyroid recovered. The nervous system tone came back up. The muscle started burning normally again. We're going to meet that hormone by name in a minute, in a different study, with a different research group, that asked a related question and produced one of the most quoted papers in obesity medicine of the last 15 years. But before we go there, if any of this is connecting dots for you, take half a second and hit subscribe. I publish one of these every week, and the algorithm only shows them to people who actually subscribed. Comments help even more than that. Drop the question you want me to cover next. I read every one. Now, about that hormone. The hormone is called leptin. It's made by fat tissue itself, which is the first surprise. Your body fat is not an inert layer. It's an endocrine organ. It secretes hormones, and the most important one it sends out is leptin, which travels to a region of the brain called the hypothalamus and essentially reports the size of the fuel reserve. Lots of leptin in the bloodstream tells the brain, tank is full, you can spend energy freely, hunger can stand down. Low leptin tells the brain, reserves are dropping, conserve everything, get the human to eat. When you lose weight, leptin doesn't fall in proportion to the fat you lost. It falls further, faster, and it stays low. This is where the second piece of research lives, the one I promised you. In 2011, the New England Journal of Medicine, the most cited medical journal in the world, published a study out of the University of Melbourne, led by an endocrinologist named Joseph Proieto and a researcher named Priya Sumathran. They took 50 adults with obesity, put them on a strictly supervised, very low-energy diet for 10 weeks. The average participant lost about 30 pounds. Then, and this is the part that matters, they followed every participant out to 1 year after the diet ended, measuring not just weight, but a panel of hormones that govern appetite. 9 hormones, measured before the diet, measured at week 10, measured at week 62. I'm going to walk you through what happened to 4 of them, because the pattern is the entire story. Leptin, the one we just met, dropped through the floor during the diet, as expected. A year later, with most weight regained, leptin was still sitting well below baseline. The fuel reserve signal was lying to the brain. The brain believed there was a famine. Ghrelin, produced mostly in the stomach lining, the most famous so-called hunger hormone. It rises before meals. Within an hour of eating, it falls. Ghrelin was elevated during the diet. That part the participants felt acutely. The shocking finding? Ghrelin was still elevated a full year later. The body was running a permanent pre-meal hunger signal around the clock. Peptide YY, secreted by the gut after meals, one of the brain's primary "you've eaten enough" signals, suppressed during the diet. Still suppressed at 1 year. The brake on the appetite was disabled. Cholecystokinin, released by the small intestine in response to fat and protein, another of the great satiety signals. Same pattern. Down during, down a year later. Across the panel, the result was uniform. Every hormonal signal that says eat more went up during weight loss and stayed up. Every hormonal signal that says you're full, you can stop, went down during weight loss and stayed down. And these shifts didn't normalize when the weight came back. They were still measurable 12 months later in adults who had returned to roughly their previous size. This is what we mean when we say the body defends a weight. It is not a feeling. It is not a frame of mind. It is a coordinated, multi-hormone biological response, documented in arguably the most rigorous medical journal in the field, in adults losing a perfectly normal amount of weight under perfectly normal supervision. The appetite system has a memory, and that memory is longer than your motivation. So if you have ever, and I mean ever, come off a successful diet and felt like you couldn't trust your own hunger anymore, like the dial was turned up to 11 and nobody had given you a way to turn it back down, what you were feeling has a name, a paper, and a chart in a peer-reviewed journal. It's not in your head. It's in your bloodstream. But there's a piece this story doesn't yet explain. Because the Melbourne research was done on adults across a range of ages, and the pattern showed up in all of them, so why does this whole cascade hit so much harder, so much faster, and stick so much longer after the age of 40? The answer isn't in your hormones. The answer is in the tissue most people have been quietly losing for 2 decades without noticing. For most of your life, you've been told muscle is for movement, lifting groceries, climbing stairs, looking decent in a t-shirt. That description is correct, and it's embarrassingly incomplete. In 2006, a researcher named Robert Wolfe, at the time at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, published a paper in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition with one of those unassuming titles that hides a small bomb: The Underappreciated Role of Muscle in Health and Disease. In that paper, Wolfe laid out in clinical detail everything muscle tissue actually does that has nothing to do with moving you across a room. It is the largest reservoir of amino acids in the human body. Every protein your immune system, your liver, and your healing tissues need to assemble, they pull from this reserve. It is the primary site where your body parks blood sugar after a meal. Roughly 4 out of every 5 molecules of glucose your body clears from the bloodstream go straight into muscle tissue for storage and use. Not the liver, not fat cells, muscle. And this is the part Wolfe pushed into the endocrinology conversation. Muscle is itself a hormone-producing organ. It secretes signaling molecules called myokines that talk to fat tissue, to the immune system, and to the brain. The more of it you carry and the more often you contract it, the more of this hormonal traffic you generate. Now layer in what the literature has consistently shown about aging. Beginning somewhere around age 30, adults lose on average 3 to 8% of their lean tissue per decade. The rate quietly accelerates in your 40s and 50s. By the time most adults reach 60, they have given up something close to a quarter of the muscle they had at 25. The clinical term for this slow erosion is sarcopenia. Most people never notice, because the same person tends to gain fat in the same window, so the bathroom scale stays flat while the body composition underneath rearranges itself entirely. Here's the part that closes the story. Every round of food restriction that doesn't actively protect this tissue takes a portion of it with the fat. The published research on dieting suggests that, without specific countermeasures, somewhere between 20 and 40% of the weight lost on a typical calorie-cut diet is not fat. It's the very tissue you cannot afford to lose. After 40, those countermeasures are not optional. They are the difference between losing 15 pounds and losing 15 pounds of yourself. Now we can connect every wire in this video. You have a body that downshifts background expenditure when food gets short. You have an appetite system that runs an extended hunger signal for at least a year after a diet ends. And under both of those, you have the slow, steady disappearance of the largest metabolic tissue you own. The tissue responsible for parking sugar, storing fuel, and producing hormone signals that keep the rest of the dashboard reading healthy. Which brings us, finally, to the lab test almost no physician orders. When muscle mass drops and fat mass rises, the body composition shift most adults are unknowingly running through their 40s, your capacity to pull sugar out of the bloodstream falls. The pancreas notices and compensates. It releases more insulin to do the same job. For a while, sometimes a long while, blood sugar stays squarely in the normal range. The pancreas is working overtime, but the readout on your standard physical doesn't show it. The number that does show it is fasting insulin. This isn't a fringe lab. Research stretching back to the late 1980s, much of it pioneered at Stanford by an endocrinologist named Gerald Reaven, has shown that fasting insulin starts climbing measurably 5 to 10 and sometimes 15 years before fasting glucose budges. The blood test on your standard physical reads in range. The number that would have caught the problem earlier was never on the order form. If you've ever sat in a doctor's office holding a printout that says all your labs are normal while every other signal from your body argues the opposite, that gap is the gap this marker tends to live in. It's the slow burn fuse the standard panel was not designed to find. So, knowing all of this, the defended weight, the hormonal aftermath, the disappearing tissue, the hidden climb in the background, the natural next question is the only useful one left. What does the published research actually show works long-term for adults losing fat after 40? The honest answer is shorter than the marketing of any diet you've heard of, and it begins on a plate. It begins with protein. The published nutrition science on adults losing fat has converged on a finding that 20 years ago was controversial and today is broadly accepted. When you're in an energy deficit, you need more protein, not less, the opposite of what most diet advice from a standard physical sounds like. Researchers at McMaster University in Canada, led by a scientist named Stuart Phillips, have produced, across more than 2 decades of work, some of the clearest data on this question in the field. The literature consistently suggests that adults losing fat preserve more of their lean tissue, feel more satisfied between meals, and spend more calories digesting their food when they bring protein intake meaningfully above the levels recommended for sedentary younger adults. The numbers in the literature vary, the direction does not. Plant or animal source, the body uses both. The total daily amount and the distribution of it across the day are what move the needle. This one change does something the calorie equation alone cannot. It tells the body, in language the body understands, that the tissue you have is worth keeping. But protein on its own is necessary, not sufficient. Resistance training. In 2017, the New England Journal of Medicine published a study out of Baylor College of Medicine, led by a researcher named Dennis Villarreal, on older adults losing significant amounts of fat. They compared 4 groups: diet alone, diet plus aerobic exercise, diet plus resistance work, diet plus both. After 6 months, the results were not subtle. The groups doing resistance work, alone or combined, preserved dramatically more lean tissue than the diet-only or cardio-only groups. The combined group also kept the most functional strength. This is not a recommendation that you take up powerlifting. The published research uses the term loosely. Body weight movement, resistance bands, machines at a gym, dumbbells at home, anything that asks a muscle to push back against load, performed regularly, hits the relevant signal. After 40, restricting food without this stimulus costs you tissue you cannot afford to give up. On this point, the science is, at this stage, settled. Then there's the variable that costs the least, requires nothing on a plate, and gets ignored more than any other: sleep. In 2010, researchers at the University of Chicago, in a study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, did something almost cruel. They took participants on identical calorie-restricted diets and assigned half of them to sleep 8.5 hours a night, the other half to sleep 5.5. Same food, same daily total, different sleep. The well-rested group lost fat, the sleep-deprived group lost weight, but only about half as much of it came from fat. The rest came from the very tissue we've been talking about for the last several minutes. Read that again. The same diet, with shorter sleep, redirected the loss out of body fat and into the metabolic engine. Sleep was not a wellness garnish. Sleep was determining which tissue was being burned. The mechanism is now well established. Short sleep raises the hormones that drive hunger, lowers the ones that signal fullness, and degrades your body's handling of blood sugar, all in the same night. 5.5 hours does to your appetite system roughly what skipping breakfast does, except continuously. One last piece, and then we put the picture together. The published evidence on the rate of fat loss is consistent. Slower losses preserve more of the system intact. Aggressive deficits, the kind that produce dramatic numbers in 8 weeks, produce a deeper version of every mechanism we've already walked through in this video. Slower deficits cost less, in every sense that matters. Less lean tissue, less of the hormonal aftermath, less of the downshift in background expenditure. The body, given a gentler signal, fights back less. And that is the synthesis the research has been building toward. When you stack these 4 findings, adequate protein, regular resistance work, real sleep, a patient pace, against the 4 problems we walked through in the first half of this video, every one of them softens. Not because you're tricking your biology, because for once you are speaking to it in the language it was built to listen to. That picture, what sustainable fat loss after 40 actually looks like, drawn entirely from peer-reviewed evidence, is what we land on next. So here is the full picture. The first half of this video walked you through 4 mechanisms. The body's defensive slowdown after weight loss, captured 6 years out in laboratory follow-up. The full system hunger and fullness aftermath that runs for at least a year past the end of any diet. The slow disappearance of your largest organ by mass, the one responsible for storing the sugar from every meal, generating heat at rest, and signaling to the rest of your dashboard that you are alive and metabolically healthy. And the silent climb in the marker that catches early decline a decade before anything else on a standard physical moves. After 40, these 4 don't operate independently, they compound. The body that runs the defensive slowdown is the same body running an inflated hunger drive. The body running the hunger drive is the same body losing the tissue that handles the sugar load from every meal. The body losing that tissue is the same body building a slow climb in a number no one is ordering. Every one of these makes the others worse, and every round of the same diet that worked at 25, done without changes, accelerates all 4 at once. This is why the old playbook stopped working. Not motivation, not the calendar slowing your engine. The system itself rewrote its own rules somewhere in your 40s, and no one updated the guidance. The second half of this video walked you through what the published evidence has been saying about how to work with the new rules instead of against them. Eat more of the macronutrient your body is built from, distributed across the day, not stacked at dinner. Move against load on a regular basis. Body weight, bands, dumbbells, doesn't matter, just regularly. Defend sleep with the seriousness most people only apply to their calendar. and lose at a pace that lets the body let go, instead of one that forces it to fight back. When you put those four together, you get a picture of what sustainable fat loss after 40 actually looks like, drawn from the literature itself. It looks slower than anything sold on a magazine cover. It pays attention to the bathroom mirror more than the bathroom scale. It values strength as much as it values size. And it produces results, quietly, durably, long after the 8-week programs have stopped delivering. And here is the part I want you to carry out of this video. If you have spent the last decade believing that the reason none of the old approaches were working anymore was that you had failed, you can put that down now. The math you were doing was right. The body the math was applied to had changed. That is not a personal verdict. That is a fact of biology, documented across 4 decades of research in journals most patients never see. You were not the broken variable in the equation. The equation was incomplete. If you've made it this far, you are exactly who this channel was built for. People who want the science their doctor doesn't have 15 minutes to explain. Hit subscribe. A new one of these goes up every week, and the algorithm only shows them to people who actually subscribed. Drop a comment with the next question you want me to cover. Why hunger after a diet doesn't fade. What the research shows about visceral fat at midlife. How GLP-1 medications work, and what the science says happens to muscle when you take them. I read every one. I'm Sophia Hart. I'll see you in the next video.